Okay, hello there. Welcome to Yoga Talks Podcast. My name is Jay Brown. Thank you for listening. I'm happy to be with you again this week. We had a big week last week. The Annika Lucas conversation spurred common threads galore, which is rare these days. I haven't had a lot of common thread action going, but I certainly got some responses, which was cool. Most of them were positive, and I think people appreciated what Annika and I shared in that conversation. But not everyone, and it makes me want to just take a moment to say something about this podcast, because as I've been mentioning, there are a lot of new people tuning in, and that's great. That was my hope, that, more people would discover it and listen. But what I didn't really think about is the intimate nature of what I'm personally doing in this podcast and how that might play in the ears of a bunch of people that I've never met and have never listened to the podcast before, don't have any context for it. And I think that's kind of what happened some last week, where I got my usual criticism, which does sting because there's some truth to it, which is you should stop interrupting people and just let them talk and stop making it about you. And I am guilty of that sometimes, I think, but not always. And recently I thought I've been doing a pretty good job of it. And what I do want to say is that there seems to be this idea of media. Like it's flattering that people think of me as some kind of a media outlet or a journalist or something. I'm not a journalist. I haven't studied journalism, and I'm not writing questions. I'm not really intending it to be what it seems like some people expect of me, which is to sort of ask a question and then let them answer it, which is what you're supposed to do, I guess. But for me, I'm really trying to have a conversation. A lot of these people I've never met before. So at the beginning, I'm actually trying to have back and forth. I'm trying to break the ice. I'm trying to get to know something about them and get a feel for them and a rapport so that we connect some, so that when we do talk about whatever kind of issues or material or their expertise or whatever, we have this context for it where it's not just a usual like PR script or something. And I'm learning in the conversation. So sometimes I'm stumbling, and sometimes I think I have this dyslexia thing that I've realized, especially with this podcast, where sometimes I just have to say, okay, wait, what did you just say? Can you say it again? And then I have to say it myself so that I can make sure that I really hear what someone's saying and I'm following them. And maybe it's just because I'm slow. And sometimes I am interjecting my own personal stuff because I feel like when I'm having a conversation with someone and they're sharing things about themselves and we're getting to know each other, it feels appropriate and only right that I'm going to share stuff about me back. Like they're going to share something about them, and I'm going to say, that relates to me. I share something about me, right? There's a back and forth there. That exchange develops something between us that is what I'm looking to have happen. And some people do seem to get that. Some people seem to feel that. And I think most of the people who are coming on the podcast themselves get that some. I hope they don't feel like, oh gosh, I wish Jay would stop interrupting me, but maybe. In any case, just to say it, I really am looking to learn in these conversations, and I'm not a perfect person, and I'm flawed, and I'm just letting you see that. I mean, this is not scripted. I'm not writing this out. I've got like a couple notes here of things I'm supposed to try to hit in this intro or something, but really I'm just sitting here talking to you. And that's going to be what it's going to be. And so anybody who's listening and wants a straight up interview, you're not going to get it here. And I hope you'll enjoy what what you do hear from me and from the people who come on the podcast. So that's it. That's what I wanted to say about that. Do keep responding, though. Like, if you've got criticisms, I'm okay. I'm pretty thick-skinned, generally speaking. Just be nice about it. But totally, if you think you've got something to say about how I'm handling these conversations, or you've got suggestions, how you think I can make it better, I'm open. I appreciate everybody who sent in emails last week after I invited you. At the end, I said, if you want to share something, if you're inspired, and a bunch of people send me emails, and I've been getting back to you guys. And that's another thing I've been really enjoying about this podcast is those of you who are kind of going there with me, I feel like there are lovely connections happening. I feel like I'm connecting to people in all kinds of places in ways that I never would just from Facebook or, even if I just go to a workshop somewhere and I meet someone one time. But these are like these really heartfelt exchanges that happen. So thank you guys. Please keep doing it. And thank you for the donations, more donations. Thank you guys. Thank you for hitting a donate button. It's much appreciated. I also just want to, as always, mention, if you're new around here and you're not familiar with me outside of this podcast, which I guess there are some people, I do teach yoga practice, and I have some videos that I offer via the internet. If you go to jbrownyogavideo.com, I've got some practice videos that come actually in 5 different lengths: 7 minutes, 15 minutes, 30 minutes, 60 minutes, and 75 minutes. And also each one of those comes with 2 audio tracks, one with more teaching and one with less teaching. So if you want to, you can turn me off. You see, you can't turn me off in the podcast, but with the practice videos, if you want to have less of me, you can do that. I also have my new workshop online, Gentle is the New Advanced. And I've been talking to my producer, for those of you who've been doing the course, and we are going to try to do some of these like supplemental videos to answer some of the common questions that have come in. Great questions coming in. So thank you. And if you're taking the course and you do have questions, don't hesitate to send them in, because you might have them answered in a video segment. So all of that can be found at jbrownyogavideo.com. Okay, today's talk is with Bernie Clark. And I had never met Bernie before, as I mentioned at the very beginning, and I knew not a lot about Yin Yoga. I've had plenty of conversations and read about it, and I'm familiar with different ideas that are out there about it, but it can be very confusing. I don't know about you guys, but there's a lot of information out there, and some of it's not all seeming to jive. So Bernie does lay it out for us. And it was fun. It was fun to talk to him. Maybe I was going to say something about it, but maybe I'm just going to wait. I'm going to wait till the other side. I'm just going to let you listen to me and Bernie talk about Yin Yoga. How are you, my friend? How are you doing?
I'm pretty good.
Yeah?
I've got a good season coming and a good season underway. And are you home for a while? Are you still traveling?
No, I'm done traveling for a little bit. I'm kind of staying at home for a little while, too. Gonna bunker down for a little while.
Yeah, that's always nice.
Yeah. So, Bernie, I've never met you before, but I've certainly heard your name before over the years. And, I've always just known you as like the Yin Yoga guy, like one of the Yin Yoga guys. And, full disclosure, before we get into anything, like I've only been to one Yin Yoga class in my entire life.
And you hated it?
No, not at all. I did not. It's not that I hated it at all. It was many, many years ago, and it was really before like Yin Yoga was like what Yin Yoga is. And I don't remember the name of the teacher. I'm sorry. I racked my brain and I couldn't find it. But I know that this person either studied directly with Paul and Sarah or like someone who studied with them, because she cited them as like the teachers of it. I remember.
Yeah, right. Where was this? Was this in New York?
It was in Manhattan. It's many years ago. And then
what I do remember, and maybe we shouldn't get too into it, is like, for me, it didn't feel that yin. Like, we were holding poses for a long time, and that didn't feel very yin to me. So I always felt like the name was always very problematic, which was interesting because that's something that you wrote. You wrote, yin is an adjective. And I thought, oh, that's a good way to say it because it can mean different things in a sense, you know?
That's right, yeah.
But in any case, since that class, I mean, I enjoyed that class some, but like not enough to make it something that I pursued.
Right.
And I have to admit, like I did have questions about it, and I felt like the questions didn't get answered that well. And that's something that's happened over the years. Like whenever I have had conversations with people about yin yoga, especially more recently, like when it's become more popular, I have to be honest that sometimes when I have a conversation about it, I come away feeling less interested in it. And I think the reason is because I feel like people don't always back up some of the statements they make. And when I was getting ready to come talk to you, I took the time to like read a bunch of things that you wrote. And I just thought it was great that your name is Bernie, because I felt like, oh, he's like the Bernie of Yin Yoga. Because I felt like you were really telling it like a very truthful account of what for you Yin Yoga is. And that felt, oh, you were really backing it up. So it's really great to talk to you. And I really appreciate some of the things that you've written. So the other thing I want to say before I hear some things from you is that I also like actually wrote some questions down, which I never do. Like I never write questions, but they're like technical questions about things that you wrote, like some technical things.
Sure.
And I kind of want to go there with you some, but I don't want to get too into the weeds. But before we go anywhere there, I do want to just hear a little something about like you maybe before you were a yoga guy. Like, did you have a former life before yoga, and what was that?
Oh, yeah. I didn't get into yoga until, well, the asana part of yoga until my early 40s.
Oh.
I got into, looking back, I can say I got into yoga in my 20s because that's when I took up meditation. And in my 40s, I took up the asana practice really to help my meditation. But up until the mid-40s and until I turned 50, yeah, I had a whole other life, and that was in the high-tech executive management world.
I see. High-tech executive management. What does that mean? Like, what did you do as a high-tech executive management person?
Well, I have a degree in physics from the University of Waterloo, and I was working for a little company. You probably never heard of it. I spent 7 years with a company called Xerox.
Okay. I see.
I was in sales with them. I was in their computer printing division, so I was doing computer science type equipment. But all roads, when you're in a company like Xerox, lead to the U.S. and specifically to Rochester. And I'd already relocated twice with Xerox and decided I didn't want to do that. So I grew up in Vancouver. I'm a Vancouverite. And I just wanted to find a place that I could just do sales and in high tech, area. And my brother, who happened to graduate from UBC with a doctorate in electrical engineer, he said a lot of his friends were joining a company in Vancouver called MDA, which stood for McDonald Detweiler and Associates. It was very high tech, so I applied there and got a job. And they sent me all over around the world. MDA is a company that would build systems for satellite observation. There's satellites up in the space that look at the Earth and take pictures of the Earth, and we'd build the ground segments for those things.
And so did your physics degree help you be able to sell that kind of stuff, I imagine?
Yeah, it helped me understand, first of all, what it was we were selling.
Yeah.
We were selling to space agencies like the Department of Space in India or NASA or the European Space Agency. So I basically traveled all over the world for several years selling all these high-tech stuff. And I got to India about 12 times, but this is all before I'd ever heard of yoga.
Right. So at this time, you weren't doing any meditation either yet. At that time, you were just
no. At that time, I started meditation in my first year with Xerox because it was such a high-pressure, stressful job. I asked one of my managers how he dealt with the stress, and he says, "I had to meditate or I die." So
I see. So
was
there like a formal teaching there, or what form did that take?
No, it was completely self-taught. I just got all the books I could on Zen meditation and
just
followed the menus. And after a decade or so of that, realized the old saying that, you can read a lot of menus, but you're still hungry.
Interesting.
So that's when I joined a real center. But this center also was a Zen center and a yoga center. And the instructor kept telling me, you should try this yoga stuff. And I kept saying, I'm not into yogurt. All these flexible young girls. And I was just there.
So it was a kind of a scene, like what kind of yoga was happening there?
Well, she was from a Shivananda background.
Okay. So
it was fairly much, hatha type yoga. It wasn't vinyasa or anything like that.
And what year was that?
That was 97.
97. Okay. Okay. And so did you start going to some classes there?
Well, finally she said the magic words to me. She said, yoga will really help your golf game.
Oh, you're a golfer. See, I'm a golfer too. Not a lot of people know that about me. But there was a period of time in my life where I got really into golf. I feel like it's very much a yoga practice. It challenges my yoga in a way that asana doesn't in certain ways. But maybe that's another conversation. So, okay, so she got you hooked because you were a golfer, and she said it'd help your golf swing. Yeah,
it'll help my golf game, and it really did. And that summer, I won my club championship. I broke par for the first time, got my first hole-in-one.
Whoa.
And so it was doing great, but now I don't golf anymore. I just do yoga, so actually it killed my golf game.
Wow, but you broke par. Well, that's impressive, man. That's impressive. I was a bogey golfer always, but that was as good as I got. Wow, well, very cool. Okay, so now you go to some Shivananda-style classes, and you enjoy them.
Yeah, I found them really, really great and very calming. It really did help with my Zen practice. And as you know, golf is a very Zen-like game. Mm-hmm. It certainly helped with dealing with stress and travel. And at that time, my marriage had also ended, so there was a lot of other stress. It was very amicable. We had a great getting divorced party. And
you really did? You had a divorce party together?
Yeah, we had lots of friends from our wedding who came 20 years later, and one guy was asking for his toaster back.
Well, that's evolved, man. That's a very evolved situation. All right, so why did you leave Xerox, and how did that happen? How did you go from being that guy at Xerox who just went to classes and meditated to going in a totally different direction, I guess you could say?
Well, as I say, after about 7 years with Xerox, I realized I didn't want to keep climbing that corporate ladder because I'd have to move. So I found this little company in Vancouver. We were only about 200 people at the time, and it started to grow. We had a fairly young management team, and today the company is billions of dollars, and we're thousands of people. So I grew with them, and but by the time I reached 50, I knew I was coming to the end of that. There was just something inside me. I'd been with them for 20 years. I joined them when I turned 30, and at the time I was 49. I'd been doing yoga for about 6 years, and I just felt the push, like something inside was saying, you've had it with this business world. You got to get out and do more yoga.
That's the same thing that my friend and teacher, Mark Whitwell, he had the same story. He did like a whole big career in the tech industry, and then at a certain point, I think a little bit younger than you, about 10 years before you, he said the same thing. It's like, I can't do this anymore. This is not where I need to be.
No, I was teaching yoga at the company at the time.
So you taught at Xerox. So did you do some kind of...
No, not Xerox. I'd left Xerox.
The other company that you started. Okay, so...
You don't know MDA, but we're the ones who build the shuttle arm that goes on the space shuttles and on the space station. So it's high-tech.
That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. All right, so say that again. So you.
So I was with this company, MDA, and I could feel it coming that I was going to have to leave. So I gave them a year's notice. I said, at the end of this next year, I'm going to be gone. So I gave them a year to kind of backfill me, and I was an executive vice president running half of the divisions of the company. And I gave them the notice, and when the time came to leave, they said, well, why don't you just consult for a bit and help your successor? So I said I'd agree to do that one or 2 days a week. But that became 4 days a week, and after a year of that, I said, time out, I really haven't left yet.
They roped you back in, huh?
Yeah. So it actually was
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you said that you were teaching classes then. Had you done any sort of teacher training or anything like that?
Yeah, after it was in 97 when I got introduced into yoga, and by 98, I was hooked and I wanted to learn more about it. So I took a 1 month intensive and, go away to a compound and learn all about this stuff. I never thought I would teach. But it was run by the same woman who owned the studio that I was going to yoga at. Uh-huh. And after the 1 month teacher training, she said, well, why don't you teach a yoga for golfers class once a week? Uh-huh. So I thought, well, that'd be cool. So I put up some posters in the various driving ranges and got about 7 or 8 students. And so I started teaching that. And then she just got me more and more classes. So I'd be teaching 2 or 3 classes a week while still working at MDA.
Oh, so you had the side gig going already.
Yeah.
Yeah. That makes it easier to leave that other job because you had something you were going to.
It was very much a slow transition. Yeah, I had about 6 years of doing more teaching and 6 years of knowing that I was coming out of this business world thing. So when the shift came, it wasn't a big transition. It wasn't a big shock.
All right. And so at some point you just said, I'm totally done with this other thing, and you just did the yoga thing?
Well, that was my intention, but they still call me in and consult once in a while. So, but now it's
hey,
down
I'm
to
sure you
hours
make
per
better
year.
money doing that consulting work than you do teaching yoga. So
Oh, for sure. And
don't
a lot of people ask me,
burn that bridge entirely. It's nice to have that.
a lot of people ask me why I don't start a yoga studio, and I said, if I wanted to stay in business, I would have stayed with MDA.
Oh gosh, maybe we get ahead of ourselves. I wanted to talk to you about Yin Yoga, not closing yoga centers. Although we can if we need to. All right, so now how do you end up getting to Paul and Sarah?
Well, that was a lot of serendipity. After a couple of years of being in the Shivananda kind of world, although my teacher would kind of slap me if I said she was Shivananda because she left that whole organization and she was just doing her own sort of thing.
I understand.
But I could see where the roots of her teaching was. Then I fell into this little backwater of yoga called Ashtanga. You've heard of it?
Oh, yeah.
And that really got me. I'm a type A hyperpersonality, so that really attracted me. So
Me too. I went right there too. It was fun. Yeah,
it's great.
But at 50, you did it though. But wait a second, you did it when you were in your 40s or 50s. I did it in my 20s.
Yeah.
That's a big difference.
Mid to late 40s. And I think maybe I burnt out. I did 5 years of Ashtanga, and then again, when I hit about 50, I kind of realized this body is not built for doing this very much longer.
That was me too. It was like, this is not a long-term plan.
Yeah.
Well, although I should qualify that because I know people who've done Ashtanga Vinyasa for 20 years and they're older than me and they are able to do it in a way that's appropriate for themselves. But
yeah, I mean, you look at David Swenson, he was in Vancouver just this weekend, he's still doing it. And David Williams, David's not doing the full thing he used to do when he was young, but he's still doing it.
Yeah, it's different practice for different folks, right?
Yeah, I mean, you got your own unique body, so you can have your own unique yoga.
Yes. Oh, music to my ears, my friend. Music to my ears. Okay, so I still don't know how you got to these other teachers, Paul Griley and Sarah Powers. We should say their full names. Yeah,
Paul Griley and Sarah. Well, again, it was a bit serendipity. I was doing Ashtanga, and that led me into power yoga. So I did some trainings with Shiva Ray and met Eric Schiffman through her, and was getting into this whole other stuff. And through Shiva, I happened to meet Saul David Ray, who's a guy out in Santa Monica. I don't know if you know Saul, but he also does. He's very bhakti, very heart centered, which to me was very unique because I'm very jnana centered. I'm very intellectual, and here's a guy coming right from the heart. And he's also a Thai yoga massage teacher.
Interesting. Well, for me, I'm a little bit more like you in the sense that I almost have to feed my intellect enough so that it'll shut up so I can feel something.
Yeah, exactly. You can overload that. So
if I just give it enough information that it's satisfied, then I can be like, okay, and then I could just have an experience,
So I took Saul's Thai massage training, and then he had an advanced training. So after a year, I went back and did that. And it was a 10-day thing in Santa Barbara. And every morning he would do a yoga class. And on the very last day, I guess he'd run out of ideas. So he said to the group, how about if we do a Yin Yoga class? And none of us had heard of it. This was back in 2003, December of 2003. So we did that, and I kind of really loved it. It was challenging just to marinate in the pose for a long time. I found it was meditative, but there's a lot of juiciness in there too. And maybe I wouldn't have thought anything of it, but the next day I'm flying home, and I had some time to kill in Santa Barbara, so I was walking down State Street there, and there was a little yoga center just off one of the corners, and they had a little bookstore area, and there was a VHF tape by some woman named Sarah Powers called Yin Yoga. And I thought, this is what Paul was teaching. So I bought the tape, and I did it every day for about 3 months, and I resolved I had to meet Sarah, and she was coming to a Yoga Northwest Festival conference in Seattle in early this would be 2004, I guess. And so I met her there, and through her I met Paul Grilly, and they had a combined 10-day teacher training program in 2005, I think it was.
By that time they had already really developed, because I was reading about some of the early history and why it is that there's so much confusion around Yin Yoga. in that there was this other teacher, Polly Zink, right?
Right.
And so maybe you could say something about that. Like you can fill the listeners in a little bit on some of that history and why, and Taoist yoga and Yin Yoga and how that got a little bit confusing for folks.
Sure. Well, for that, you got to get into a bit of the biography of Paul Grilly. And Paul's an amazing guy. Personally, I think he's a genius. A genius is someone who'll see what everybody else sees, but the genius goes, aha! And everyone else is saying, what? Mm-hmm. And he just put a whole bunch of different threads together and developed what we know today as Yin Yoga. But he was already into yoga for quite a while. He was in the Santa Monica, LA scene. He was at Yoga Works for a while, teaching there. And he ran a Bikram studio for a while. He was doing Ashtanga. But one time he was just flipping through the TV, and on one of these community stations, somebody was interviewing this martial arts guy named Paul Zink. And Paulie was doing these demonstrations. And Paul said he'd never seen anybody as flexible as Paulie, despite all his years of doing yoga. And so through the TV station, he managed to contact Paulie, asked him how he got to be so flexible. And Paulie said, well, why don't you come to my place and I'll show you. So Paul went there, and Paulie he was a mechanic, I think, at the time, and he'd have his garage where he'd do his work. And I don't know how many times a week it was, but people would come to his garage and he'd, I guess, move the cars out, and they'd do yoga and then they'd do martial arts.
He was an auto mechanic who then moved the cars out and taught yoga classes at the garage?
That's what I'm told, yeah.
That's amazing.
And so Paulie would teach these guys martial arts. He's a master in monkey kung fu. Okay. But Paul was only there for the yoga part. So they'd do yoga for maybe an hour or so, and then everyone else would do their martial arts for several more hours, and Paul would leave. And so Paul went there once a week for several months, like almost a year, not quite a year, I think. And he realized one of the things that Paulie was doing was he was holding postures for a long period of time.
And do we know how Paulie got to that?
Paulie was taught by his master, Cho Chat Ling. And Cho Chat Ling was in this lineage of monkey kung fu and learned it from his uncle. And I guess one of the things as a guru, you have to pass it on to the next generation. And he didn't find anyone in Hong Kong, so he came to LA and he came across Paulie doing some karate or something like that in a university in LA, and said, that's my protege. And so he got Paulie to study with him, and Paulie studied with him like 8 hours a day for 10 years or something like that. And at that point, his Master Cho says, okay, I've taught you everything. You've learned it in 10 years. It took me 20 years to get it. I'm gone. It's all yours.
Wow.
And so he went back to Asia, and as far as I know, he's not a martial artist. He's in Thailand doing import-exports. And it was all Paulie.
But isn't that very traditional? Like you fulfilled the directive of your teacher. Your teacher told you to do that. You got to fulfill it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay,
so Paulie was calling this stuff that he was doing, he called it Taoist yoga.
That's right, Taoist yoga
he
first.
Comes from this lineage. He did take some Hatha yoga trainings, I guess. He watched some TV shows. I'm not really sure what his Hatha lineage is, but he mostly was coming from this Taoist side. So when Paul met Paulie, it was all part of Taoist yoga. Now, part of the stuff Paulie had added to what Cho Chat Ling had taught him, like we all do. We take what our teacher gives us, but we kind of make it our own.
Right.
And so Paulie was the one who really said, let's hold these poses for a long period of time. And Paul realized just how effective that was. But he only studied with him, as I said, for about less than a year. And then he moved out of town, and I think Paulie eventually moved out of town. And when Paul was teaching at Yoga Works, he was giving classes in this Taoist yoga technique. And one of his students was Sarah Powers, who was also a teacher there. She was into Ashtanga, as Paul was. But then their paths diverged. Paul went off and did a master's degree. But several years later, they kind of crossed path again. And Paul had spent more time thinking about, well, what is there about this practice that's so effective? And at the same time, he'd always been a student of anatomy. He was taking anatomy classes at UCLA. And he also was studying the energy body from his teacher in traditional Chinese medicine and Japanese yoga-type techniques called Dr. Moriyama. And Dr. Moriyama is a yoga adept. His mother was a yoga adept, so he'd mastered all these weird sort of things you hear about in Patanjali, Yoga Sutra, and Yogananda. And so through Dr. Moriyama, Paul really got a good basis of understanding of the energy body and not just from an Eastern point of view, but also from a Western point of view as to how it works. Like Dr. Murayama has 2 PhDs in Western science and psychology.
And yet he teaches about energy bodies.
Well, he was also a traditional Chinese medicine student, and he was a Shinto priest, as well as being a yoga adept. And so Murayama was a real bridge between East and West. And so Paul learned a lot about Taoist theory and other parts of yoga theory through Dr. Murayama, learned about anatomy through Dr. Gary Parker at UCLA, plus his own experience with Pauly. And his wife, Susie, is a dancer and a choreographer. And she says, well, dancers are doing this all the time. They hold a pose for a long period of time.
Stretches, yeah.
And Paul discovered that's the case, too. Even the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, the 15 asanas described there, 8 of them are seated postures. You hold for a long period of time. 7 are yin, or 7 are yang, like Mayurasana, very muscular. The other 8 are very yin-like, passive. So this isn't new. This has been around since the early days of Hatha Yoga.
Well, I mean, so let's go on from there. So now Paul's teaching Taoist yoga, which is interesting to me because I actually studied a little bit of Taoism before I got to yoga too. And I've always felt like, in certain ways, I think you could make a case that the word Tao and the word yoga could be synonymous.
Yes, although I've seen some Taoist centers who hate that when they see people adding Taoist to yoga. They say these are 2 very different maps. It's like a weather map versus a street map.
I know, but isn't that more
like... They both might
like...
have Vancouver on there, but they're not the same thing at all.
Isn't that a little bit because like some people Taoism is more of a religion, and for some people like the Tao is more of a concept?
Well, there's 5 branches of Taoism. One of them is called alchemical Taoism, which is like yoga. It's the Taoism of changing and exercise. But there's other branches of Taoism, which is very ritualistic or divinational, trying to foretell the future, like the I Ching. So if you just look at one narrow slice of Taoism, the alchemical part, that's very similar to yoga.
I see. All right. So when does Paul decide to go from calling it Taoist yoga to Yin Yoga?
Well, that's actually Sarah. When Paul came out of his kind of retirement, when his paths crossed with Sarah at one point, and Sarah suggested, maybe you should start coming into my teacher trainings or my classes and offering this yin practice again. But, we're only doing the seated postures. We're not doing the full Taoist yoga of Pauly. And if we keep calling it Taoist yoga, we're going to confuse people. Taoist yoga is Pauly's term for what Pauly teaches, which is great. If anyone gets a chance to study with Pauly, they should grab it. He's an amazing guy.
But he's combining a bunch of different things, right?
It's a very different thing than Yin Yoga. He's got the whole Taoist thing. So he's got the 5-element theory. There's Yang, there's Yin. But Paul was only doing the seated postures. And what Paul and Sarah did is they made a whole yoga practice out of it. And I think that's one of the ingenious things that Paul did was he took a sliver of something that had been around forever. Even in Iyengar, in his Light on Yoga book, he says, hold Supta Virasana for 10 to 15 minutes. Well, that's Yin Yoga.
Everybody laughs when they read that. They're like, yeah, like anybody's going to hold it for that long. That's what you do in Yin, right?
I love that one. We don't hold it for 10 to 15 minutes. 5 minutes is probably enough. But you see, it's been around for a long time. But what Paul did is he extracted that and made a whole class out of it with an opening meditation and shavasana and counter poses. And that had never been done before.
I see. So he kind of shaped it into like a group class context.
Correct. And a full class all on its own. So it was Sarah who said, let's just call it Yin, because we're not doing the full thing that Pauly teaches, and we shouldn't be confusing people thinking that if they come to our Taoist yoga, they're getting what Pauly's offering. I see. From the late 90s, they started just calling this Yin Yoga.
And see, that brings me to like where I first heard it, and kind of when I took that one Yin class, for me, we were holding poses for a long time, and there's a certain confrontational element to that. Like even if you're not trying to go all the way in and you hit the Goldilocks pose, as you call it, which I really like, and we can talk about that. But even when you're just there and you're not going too far, let's say, but you're holding for a long time, there's so much that comes up, you know what I mean? There's like so much that goes on in that. And to me, that didn't actually feel all what I think of as yin. Like if I inhale my arms up and exhale my arms down in smooth, mindful movements, that feels very yin to me. But like having to like deal with like what comes up when I'm holding a pose for 5 minutes, that doesn't always feel very yin to me. I get that it's more passive in terms of like its technical aspect. But that's what I kind of liked when you said yin is an adjective, it can kind of take on different hues and different flavors and colors to it, really,
Yeah, well, let's come back to that, because there is nothing that's absolutely yin. Yin is not a noun. Like if I asked you, is hot water yin or yang? What would you say?
I mean, I don't know. It would be hard because I feel like it could be both.
Exactly.
Usually,
relative to
I guess
boiling
hot
water.
usually would associate with more of a yang, right? No, I guess not, though, because hot can be very soothing and very yin,
Yeah, but relative to boiling water, hot water is yin.
That's right.
So you can't just say, yin or yang. Everything's relative to something else. So cold water is not yang or yin. Cold water can be yang compared to ice.
Right.
So you always need a context before you can really apply the term yin or yang. Right. So when you're holding this pose, there's parts of yin yoga that's very yang, and there's parts of yang yoga that's very yin.
Right. And so you think that really it's clear, like it's really about this idea of it's not a vinyasa style flowing class. It's not even, how does it then differ from like in a Iyengar class where you're just doing 5 poses with a bunch of prop setups? Because are you using a lot of props in a yin class?
You can, but it's not restorative yoga either.
Yeah.
Because you need to feel an edge.
Oh, let's talk about that. Let's talk about you need to feel an edge. Okay, now we're going to transition over into some of this technical stuff.
Okay.
Because that's in my notes. I mentioned my notes. This idea of you need to feel the edge. And so before we get to need to feel the edge, there was something that you said that I thought was really important, which is you were differentiating between stretching and stressing a joint.
Yes.
Because that is like the big criticism, and you speak to it in that thing that you wrote. And let's just say for everybody listening, if they don't know this, that the big criticism is that when you hold these poses for a really long time, if someone's not doing it in such a supported way, it's very easy for that to go into the joints. And there's this kind of criticism that you're destabilizing joints or you're stretching ligaments. And that some people are making a case that that's not a good thing, that there's nothing in your knee that wants to stretch necessarily. It's not a muscle, it's a joint, Right.
If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of J. Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.